Hello and welcome to my latest weekly property news from Madison's. Well, I don't think I've ever seen a week where there have been quite so many news headlines to do with the taxation of property and how that is affecting the UK property market. So there are lots of ways that the government makes money from our love of owning property. You've obviously got stamp duty. That's a big contentious subject. You've got capital gains tax. So at the moment, it was rumoured from the last budget that it might not be the case, but at the moment, when you sell your principal private residence, it's free of CGT, capital gains tax. But if you sell any other property, a second, third, fourth, fifth investment property, holiday home, whatever it might be, you are liable to capital gains tax. And then, of course, there's inheritance tax. So sadly, when you pass away, you have to give a percentage of your estate if it's over a certain threshold to the government. And with property prices rising, that has obviously increased. So there have been so many stories this week about taxation and a general feeling of how it is really stifling the market. So Property Mark, one of the big ombudsmen that sort of govern us and an industry professional body that ensures that we all do correct conduct, they have been championing this week for a reform on stamp duty. They are looking back at the figures that were recorded on property sales in 2021 and comparing them to 2025, which wasn't a bad year. So 2021, where's my figures? I've got so many figures. Sit down here. There were 1,073,000 properties sold. In 2025, that was 920,000, which is about a 14% drop. So their argument is that reducing the nil rate, the stamp duty threshold right down to nil up to a certain property price, which solved most people saved them about £15,000, really stimulated the market. And if we could get more of that going on again, they feel that the market would be stimulated. I've no doubt of that, actually. I mean, we do see rushes in activity to beat a stamp duty threshold. My only slight, I suppose, think about that is in 2023, we had the higher raised stamp duty thresholds. It didn't really make much effect until the Labour government said they were going to take them back to what they had been before those thresholds. And then we saw a real surge of activity as people tried to beat that deadline. So something can become the norm quite quickly. But there is absolutely no doubt that stamp duty you pay on a property purchase is huge, absolutely huge. It is. We're not talking beans here. We are talking huge sums of money. So certainly there's no doubt that if that was taken down, then obviously the market would stimulate a bit. Looking at inheritance tax, well, did you know the government has a target of what it likes to achieve? And this year, the target is sitting at 9 billion, I think, isn't it? Yeah, 9.1 billion is the target for this year. From April to December so far, they were at 6.6 billion, which was 200 million, these numbers today, oh my gosh, 200 million more than the last period year on year. And that is largely because inheritance tax bans have been frozen for some time now. So they used to go up a bit. The government used to recognise that the value of your assets is appreciating, inflation, etc. So they would raise that nil rate band, as it's called, before you had to start paying inheritance tax. That's been frozen for quite a while now. And of course, property prices have continued to rise. So enormous calls that they need to sort that out. Of course, there's very little you can do around inheritance tax if your main value does sit in your home. If you are lucky enough to have other assets, you can do lots of exciting things with it to try and reduce that inheritance tax ban. But if your value sits in your property and you don't want to sell that property, you're really beholden to the rules, I'm afraid. There's very little you can do. And then looking at capital gains tax, well, of course, that's a very different tax that you can control. So you can decide if you are going to dispose of that asset, because many assets are what they call pregnant with gains. So the gain doesn't have to be paid until you have done something with that asset and crystallised that position. So you could have a property that's gone up massively in value, but until you sell that, that gain all just sits there in the property. And of course, when you die, that gain gets wiped out, passes to your estate, and inheritance tax becomes applicable. So there are things you can do to far more proactively manage your capital gains tax liability. And no surprises, the government has reported a drop in capital gains tax receipts. which is a sign, I think, that more and more people are proactively managing their position. Fell by 8.4% year on year in 2025, down from 14.9 billion to 13.5. So you can see huge sums of money. The biggest generator is that stamp duty thing. I haven't got the current figures with me. That is an enormous generator of tax. So all of that going on. Interesting, the super prime market is affected. I think there are other things going on with that. When I talk about super prime, I mean those kind of really £5 million plus sales in central and sort of peripheral London. That is definitely being affected with lots of chatter. There's research and reports coming out that with the last two budgets and the uncertainty, there's a feeling that buyers are and sellers are sitting on their hands. But let's end with some good news. Conveyancers and brokers, mortgage brokers, have both reported an upturn in their number of new leads. So that's really good news. That's a good indicator of people getting ready to think about a move and doing their homework beforehand. And also home ownership barriers, there are signs they are reducing. One of the big ones, of course, I spoke about recently was first-time buyers and their deposits. More and more mortgages coming out that are either nil deposit or very, very low. And with that raised stamp duty threshold that you do have for first-time buyers up to 500,000, then that is a good incentive. So those barriers reducing, taxation, death and taxes, the only two things that are certain in life. So yeah, lots going on in the world of tax this week. Next week I'll bring you something a bit more cheery, a bit more topical of the property market that you might be of interest to you. But yeah, I couldn't believe how much on tax. Well, if you are thinking of moving, we have launched a beautiful 5-bedroom house on Broadmead. It's a really generous property. So 5 bedrooms, I say, it's got a lovely garden studio as well. I love this part of Tunbridge Wells. You are walking distance to the Pantiles, the High Street, and yet you can get really good value for money properties. This one is on at a guide of £950,000. So if that is of interest, please do give us a call. I hope you have a really great week, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.